everybody, welcome back to the studio. Today I have a special guest. We just finished playing Black Seas over here in the gaming hall. It was a good time. What do you think? Good time?
Good, yeah, it's great. Black Seas is great. I love just shooting broadsides. It's hard to find any kind of movies, even on Netflix, I think we were talking about, on YouTube, trying to find out, like, there's no information about how to fight a naval ship in 1800s.
No.
I can't find anything.
There's nothing out there. I wanted to welcome Rob to the channel today. Rob Rhodes, you've heard me talking about him. He's had a big influence on my gaming, my modeling, the way I'm setting up my boards. So I got some questions here for you, Rob, just some basic questions so everyone can get to know your background into gaming and the kinds of things that you're looking forward to in the future. So question number one. What got you started in wargaming? What's the history like from the time you were a little
the classic
kid,
question.
or?
Yeah, it's always these classic questions. When I used to do a podcast, we always have these classic questions of how did you start? What did you do? How did you find it? What did you all these kind of questions. And for me, it goes back to the 1980s. A lot of us are from the Airfix generation, the MCP or something, or Roco mini tanks. We did a lot of collecting like that. Never did a war game. We always did collections. Had the Airfix Germans. Couldn't wait for the new boxes to come out by Eschi, ESCI, and just kind of building collections like that. Take a break like we always do in our mid-20s, and then come back to it when we're in our 30s and our 40s. I'm the classic example of you liked it when you were young, you got away from it, and then you came back. So that's I think for me. Is where it all started for me, is kind of having these giant collections when you're younger, and then coming back and say, okay, what can I do better? Especially when I started painting again, I was still using enamel paints as of like 8 years ago, and brushes from like Walmart. So I really have revamped my painting style very quickly, evolved very fast into how I would do all these things. Wargaming wise, I went out just as Alan has and looked for people to play with, and I didn't find anybody. I'm like, there's nobody around here. There's nobody to, like, I need to create my own group. So what I did is I went out and said, you know what, I like Facebook, it's fun. I like Twitter, that's cool too. So I said, I'm going to create a group, create a community, build a community, and say, let's find guys to play games with and have a group of guys and build this up and have a great time with it, and build up, have inspiration to build armies of history that you never think you would even think about doing.
So was that your beginnings of your History to War Games podcast? If you guys have not got on his podcast, I recommend you getting over to, I know it's...
it's kind of a start and stop podcast. So we kind of started it, we stopped it, we started it, stopped it. We're kind of in limbo as we speak right now too. We do a Facebook group. We've done the Battle Group War Games Rules Facebook group. We do Twitter. So it's kind of, we do other things. We've done a podcast. I did a podcast for about 2 to 3 years, and that's where you interview all these different people. And so what happens is it kind of evolved in from painting with enamel paints, starting to run into more people throughout the world and say, hey, you know what? Hey, you paint too? Oh, good. You war game, so that's great. So we started interviewing, connecting with other guys around the country with this podcast, and creating kind of a community feel, and kind of really interviewing those and saying, hey, you know what? There's hobby people like this in Australia, New Zealand, UK, Germany, Spain, Italy. There's groups all over the place. We just have to bring them all together, and it seems to be the common goal for all these different companies, to bring all these people together in some way for conventions.
Right, and that's the beauty of social media. It's got its downside, but that's how I met Rob, was through my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Another viewer of my YouTube channel said, hey, you need to hook up with Rob Rhodes. Him and Jason Rowe do the History of War Games podcast. I met him at a game shop in Newark, Ohio, and the rest is history. Next thing you know, we went to a convention, right. And we're gaming on a regular basis.
Sure.
Zach Musselman was just here today.
Yeah.
We played a game, and he pretty well refereed, and that's just how it's gone. So it's the old saying I have here on the channel is like attracts like. So we tended to be like celestial bodies. We just tend to come together. We all tend to have similar type backgrounds as far as our interest in wargame. I'm interested to hear you say that it goes all the way back to the 80s, because that's about the era that I started gaming too.
There's Bon Jovi, Airfix, and Eschi, right?
Right. So, I mean, it's weird. You start talking to other guys out there, even if they're in their 60s and early 70s. There's always this common thread of Army men, D&D, this little thread that runs through. But I also know you are involved in the tournament scene. So not only do you have a podcast hosting games, but as I've gotten to know you, and we went to the convention in Gettysburg, actually outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, we were talking, and you were saying how you were involved in the tournament scene in terms of bolt action and Warlord games.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about that and your experience with organizing. What I call, when I was a scoutmaster, we called it corralling the squirrels.
Or,
right?
Or kittens, as I call it. Corralling cats, taking cats for walks, kind of stuff like that. I really got motivated with bolt action. I've never experienced 28 millimeter before. I always did 20 millimeter, those kind of things, and just found that painting a bigger scale was a lot easier. And doing World War II was even more my favorite. You know, we all watched Private Ryan. We grew up with those kind of movies. Band of Brothers had come out, I think, early 2000s also. So we always liked the Normandy feel of things, and I've had relatives serve in the Pacific in the 1st Marine Division. So I always had a love for World War II movies, World at War series, which is the classic series we always used to watch. So I find that what happens is the tournament scene was just like my competitive nature. I'm like, okay, I want to build this list. I've never been in a list building type game before. World War II, I like that. So I said, you know what, I'm going to build French 1940 before they were cool. I brought Char Bs, I brought R-35s, I brought Hotchkiss tanks, I brought French cavalry before French cavalry were like nerfed or something in version 2. Like, it was all this stuff that people had never seen before, and they didn't know what to do with it, and I always got beat really bad. That's one army I brought to one tournament. I brought to another army to Cold Wars, and that was Japanese. No one had Japanese before. It's all before kind of these armies are all kind of, you know, normal now, I guess. Before they were normal. I did French Partisans one time. Like, no one had ever seen French Partisans before. Now we got, just last month French Partisans have been released by Warlord, and they've done a whole series of new models for them. So it's kind of that thing where you kind of on the leading edge of always on these things. And being in the tournament scene, Historicon, I was at that tournament scene, and it was nice to run into the original bolt action radio guys. Some of you have been around long enough to know that the original podcasts for World War II bolt action was started by those guys. Those guys were like the leading group of guys before the Australian podcast started, before any kind of podcasting was available. These were the guys I listened to, and they were funny. They were always drinking. They did the same way at the conventions. They were always drinking all the time, and they drank at least 15 beers the whole time. And I'm like, how can you function and win with I think one guy had German Para. He won the whole thing. I'm like, how did you win on 15 cans? I can't believe it. And still be functioning and standing up. It was amazing to me. So being in the tournament scene, I did a 2-day tournament once, and with that, what I saw was I would wake up, take my list to the tournament. I would then be standing for 10 hours straight and never move more than 6 inches. So it was kind of the thing, like I went to a convention, but I didn't see a convention. I ran and grabbed a hot dog for 5 minutes, came back before you can even do anything else, and before you know it, it's 10 o'clock at night, and now it's the next day it's going to happen again. So I went to a convention, but I didn't see a convention is what happened. So there's basically a tournament inside of a convention. So it was cool. It was good to kind of have that experience. I felt stressed out. I felt like anxiety. I needed like to drink on Sunday night. It was like all these things I had to do because I had played this tournament all weekend long, but I was supposed to be relaxing. So that's what I found with the tournament scene. But it was nice to run into and see these other armies and highly painted armies and stuff like that. I think the one highlight for me that I remember is having a true 1940 game. I played the French, played against a German force. And I lost, but it was finally a game that was historical because every single game during those weekends was ahistorical. It was like Japanese versus French and stuff like that. So
yeah, I mean, that's the things I've organized in my day. It ends up the stress and the dealing with people can sometimes take away all the joy.
Right.
And it's nice to be able to back away and just play casual games like this. So hey, here's a tip. If you guys are involved in tournaments, go easy on the guys organizing the tournaments. Be cool. Be there when you're supposed to be there, and do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
Kind of sum it up.
It's tough, yeah.
And they need help. So, hey, is there anything I can do to help?
Yeah.
Right? It's the old 95-5 rule, and it applies to church, Boy Scouts, tournament scene.
Right.
That is 5% of the people, sometimes less, do 95% of the work.
Yeah.
So it's
Well, I've seen the league games. We used to do a league also where I built a lot of community with the league, a Bolt Action League, and got tons of sponsorship. I think in 1 year that I had the league, I had like 10 games. I gave away $3,500 worth of prizes. I did $500 per weekend that we had the tournament. It's very easy to find sponsors that want to support these tournaments and support these leagues. You just have to go out and get them. I think that's what I found out the most is the reason people show up is not for the prize support. They show up because they want to have a great game. When they don't have a great game, they don't show up the next time. And I had a peak of 17 people show up, but then I would swing all the way back down to 4 because they didn't have a great time, because somebody was shaking their dice too loud, or they had brought a 2 flame floor bolt action marine list and got crushed. I mean, that's just it's hard to have a great time in that sense with a tournament. Sometimes it gets too competitive for them.
Yeah, I have been there, not participating, but watching a tournament and seeing guys throwing miniatures. And so I guess that would be a lesson to take away, is just play for the fun of it. It's good to have that competitiveness come out. I remember down here years ago in my basement with my son and my nephew and a couple of their friends, and we'd end up in a yelling match over the rules. So something important to keep in mind. And segueing from tournament experience to just casual play, obviously casual play is the way to go. But we're seeing, it was interesting that you said, well, bolt action, because that's really a skirmish level game. And the game that I first played, well, not really the first game, but the first organized game with a group we played together was the
Battle Group.
Battle Group, thank you. I was thinking Battlefront was stuck in my head. But Battle Group, and him and Jason are really, really big into Battle Group, and I was at the time mostly playing Flames of War, kind of morphing more to Black Powder era games at that point in my gaming. And the thing that immediately got me was the group games. I immediately was hooked now on group gaming.
Sure. Because
it's so fun having 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys around a table just, playing casually. Because I don't remember any, well, we're not going to mention any names. There've been a couple little temper flares here and there, kind of minor, but in the games we played. But it's really 99% of the time it's very casual, no one's getting upset, and going from skirmish to mass infantry battle, which is, Battle Group is 15 millimeter, company level battles. And that interplay between skirmish to mass battles, and where you think you see the future of this hobby headed. Are we just going to see the two living side by side, or are we going to see, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what we see is mass battles was hot. We'd see that in the 1990s to early 2000s. I did a lot of research looking at old battle reports, old magazines. I remember looking at there's an old War Games Illustrated magazine possibly, or Wargamer magazine. I remember looking at that back in the mid 90s, and there would be mass battles in that magazine. What we've seen is kind of an evolution where mass battles was kind of the thing to do. We went to skirmish level. We had Saga come out. We've had Bolt Action come out. We've had other, Legions come out. We've had all these other games, an evolution of sorts for wargaming, because there wasn't very much back then. There was Battleground, I think, was something that was released in the late 90s or early 90s, and then you had Flames of War that kind of built off the back of that. And Flames of War was huge. I mean, company level stuff. I've heard tournament sizes were 150, 100 people at tournaments at these conventions. So you got 50 pairs of people playing for the grand prize. And I see now more skirmish level, but then I see, we have Warlord Games who just released
Yep.
epic style battle games.
Right.
Now, both you and I know that we're already doing this.
Yes.
And so what happens is you catch the curve. It's like catching a wave before there's a wave, and you realize like we've already been doing this in 15 millimeters. Some of you have seen the pictures, you've seen them online, and just to kind of see that we've been doing that for years. And what you see is we want it to look exactly how it kind of looked. Where are the drummer supposed to be? Where is the officer supposed to be?
Right.
You know, and we see this with this new 13.5 millimeter Warlord. It's like, well, yeah, you can change the scale, you can make whatever scale you want to do, but at the same time, they're looking for a masked effect. And I think a lot of us struggle now is the time consumption of painting a 28 millimeter, 40 millimeter miniature. It will take you at least an hour per guy, total time, if you really add it all up. Whereas you could build an army in an hour in 12 millimeter. So, and especially with the contrast washes coming out, the contrast paints.
Right.
I think what contrast paints have done for GW, and also Vallejo has inks and washes too, is changed how you paint your miniatures.
Right.
We no longer spray them black and start from the scratch up, build our paints up, and try not to go all the way from the bottom up. We spray them tan, we spray them white, we spray them green, and then we build them up with washes and do it that way. And you save a whole step of time.
Tabletop standard.
Yeah, tabletop standard, and you don't have to worry about it. But the thing is, it's all done. It doesn't have to be all this, you know, this precision of painting in a way.
So I always say they're going to live side by side, and almost skirmishes not only just a good entry level to get in, but also if you're been gaming a long time like the two of us have, and you're kind of just getting tired of building these giant armies, it's a nice alternative. So it can work either way, either as a beginning guy getting to skirmish, or guys like us who just want to do skirmish because it's simpler and quicker, and then it's going to just morph based on the person's interest level.
Right.
So,
just to cover a couple things there is we have a good friend, Joe Veltri, who does a lot of skirmish level games, and he does a gladiator game. He has a medieval
God's
game.
Eye games.
God's Eye games. Yeah, he has these games where you can do archery competitions. You can do one-on-one combat, just like the movie Gladiator, and you can kind of do this where you only paint one guy, and you're ready to go, and you're going to do a D10 system, and you're good to go, and you got a couple guys, and you're fighting a lion. I mean, that's really what you can do with some of these games. And then you swing back to what did what's the one Skirmish Sagan just did this recently in the last couple of weeks. They have revamped their entire system. Ultra modern combat, I think, is what they've changed it to. And what they've done with this is now they have streamlined their whole system, and now you can go fight modern day combat with Afghanistan, Soviets, Chechnya, whatever it may be that you want to do, and use some of the miniatures that you find in Spectra miniatures and use them as like bomb sniffing dogs in the Soviet Union. You know, those are the kind of things you can do now and not be so deeply building a battalion of 20 dudes in Napoleonic uniforms. And you don't have to do that anymore.
Right, and everyone knows that's done it, how tedious it can be in the process, like my American War of Independence armies that I did. Now granted, you can get them done if you bear down, but life is not usually that way. You've got ebbs and flows and things with your time. So yeah, so that's I mean, sky's the limits right now. You've got the skirmish games if you want to go that route. We've got the mass battle games that are now coming out with better starter boxes. You know, you've got literally everything that you need right in a box. We just played one here today, Black Seas. The ships are amazing. The mat, it was so cinematic, the entire game. And for $50 or so, you're getting in. You got your rule book, you got your dice, you got your starter ships. You just need to buy a mat or find some blue felt or whatever, something to get started with. Yeah. So, like I said in the video the other day, Rob, is this. I feel like this is kind of really the golden age of gaming, with literally the variety that's out there. You can literally do whatever you want, any era you want. And something that stood out when you were talking a little bit ago was this getting into more niches that are not mainstream, like with the first battle group game I played with Rob and 3 or 4 other guys was early war, World War II. And being a Flames War player, I was always late war, right? Because we wanted all the big toys and the fancy cat tanks. But I had never, I'm like, early war, my first reaction is like, why do we want to play early war? They've got like little pumas and little
not even a puma,
like little
pumas,
French
like
tanks. I'm like, French tanks.
They only, what gear do they have? Only 1 year going backwards,
Oh,
right?
Lord.
Only 1 year going backwards. They only have one color flag, white flag, right? All this French stuff that you say about French, yeah.
And
exactly.
then in the end analysis, though, when I came up from that, like, damn, that was actually pretty fun, and it was unique. So that's the flavor we have out there. So don't just feel, if you're a newer gamer, you've been playing maybe a year or two, getting into these more obscure lists and maybe some more obscure eras. But again, it's the golden age of wargaming. You've got this variety out there to kind of round things out so it's not so boring.
I'll throw a couple things on top of that really quick.
Yeah.
You got Wild West that's coming out now.
Right.
You have a great sculptor with Knuckle Duster. He does like 35 millimeter cowboys. Fantastic stuff. I used to build some 1812 Americans off of him. Fantastic guy there. Ran into him at a convention. And you got Wild West, you got Gladiators, you got Medieval, you got all these different periods of time. And I think the biggest thing that is wargamers you got to figure out is how do you explain wargaming to somebody else? You know,
Right.
There was a poll on Twitter about a week ago that said, hey, you know, do you tell your closest relatives that you are a wargamer? Do you hide it in the closet? Do you sit here and say these things like, hey, you know what, don't tell anybody what I do because look at all the toys in my house. Like, and then they do all the cartoons about, oh, your wife's sitting tea with her friends. They're like, oh, look at all, you know, your kids have a lot of nice toys. And like, no, that's my husband's toys. You know, this kind of stuff like this is what you got to think about is it's you're kind of recreating history in a way. You're trying to show what it really looked like. You're trying to create like a diorama. It's like a living diorama idea. You're getting together with other friends or other guys who enjoy history. How else can you, are we going to have a book club together? We're going to read together? No, we can be interactive and figure out, okay, well, if Saving Private Ryan, how do you save Private Ryan, you know, and if you didn't blow up the Tiger tank or the self-propelled gun, how do you do other things? So it's kind of a game of Clue and those kind of things where you're trying to figure out the mystery of how to make it better or actually make a different choice. So,
right. And the strategy element. I mean, like today with the ship battle.
Sure.
Learning the strategies and the way the ships had to turn, bearing into the wind, and that's the other aspect of it. Now, anymore, I'm like, hey, I'm a wargamer. I'm proud of it. My wife's friends or whatever, I said, hey, come down and see my finished basement. They're like, what the heck is all this stuff, you know? And it's intimidating to a lot of people. They're like, holy moly, you painted all this, or you've got all this scenery and you got this big table set up. So it's going to be a little intimidating, but I think, like I've said in other videos, we want to still invite people. They may say, you know, that's not my thing. But you might find someone that says, oh my gosh, I never knew this existed, right? And they'll jump right in. So, you know, I think that's important for us to do as more seasoned gamers, is to try to invite people, you know, to come and game who've never tried it before. Start them maybe with a skirmish game.
I think this is a good idea. Is you go and read a history book. You might have some interest in history. You might go to the history book section in Barnes and Noble. You might go to the library. Well, most of us don't go to the library anymore. But go to Barnes and Noble. You go to a bookstore. You go to Half Price Bookstore. You go to somewhere local that has books that you look at, and you look through a history magazine or you look through a history book and you say, oh, that was interesting. What did it really look like? You know, well, you can go visit the battlefield. Okay, great. Now, what did that tank look like? Or, you know, we go to the Gettysburg, we go to Antietam. You see a big giant field. They're like, what does this mean? So one reenactor shows up, just one guy. You're like, oh, okay, that's what they look like. How did 100 of them look like? What did they look like? How were they moving? I remember standing on one of the ledges when I went to a tour here in the fall. I'm standing on a ledge, and Mike Priest, who wrote A Soldier's Story, he wrote Gettysburg Second Day, he's written a bunch of books about the Civil War, and he sits here and says, picture this, you got 3 rows of men, 3 regiments stacked up right here, they don't know where to go, and all of a sudden the Confederates are behind them. Well, how many Confederates? What do they look like? Is there bands of like Confederates that look like Vikings shooting them from behind? Or is it a whole regiment of guys in 2 lines firing straight in their flanks? So it's kind of that thing is what you're trying to recreate is what it looked like. How did it look like? Are Confederates gray? Are they blue? Are the redcoats red? Or are they orange? Or are they green? You don't know what these, you know, what's a Hessian look like? And so it's kind of that idea of what did ship combat look like with the ships ebbing and flowing, pushing through the wind. kind of understanding sailing techniques. We were sailors in the past, and we understand
Right.
how sailing goes, but how do you line up your broadside so you deliver a broadside right at 3 inches or 50 yards in the middle of an ocean, no less? How do you get that maneuverability to come in, just like at Yorktown, where the French Navy defeated the British Navy, who's bringing all the reinforcements to Cornwallis? How did they do that? How did they stop an entire 5,000 man unit from showing up?
Right, and so we talked about on the channel before is how this hobby, out of all the hobbies I have been in and involved with and am currently involved with, my other types of hobbies, fishing, biking, hiking, this is the one hobby I could say, the only thing I've ever been able to compare it to is a faceted jewel. Because the jewel is amazing. You want that jewel. You're like, wow, that's a beautiful jewel. But what makes the jewel is all the facets on the jewel. And the analogy I like to use is, this is such a deep hobby, with the history, the strategy, your craft, your artistic side being able to come out as far as your color choices on what you paint things and matching them to historical accuracies as best you can. Then the other aspect that we're gonna finish up with here is the other thing that Rob has really influenced me on a great deal is the way the boards, the game boards, your game table is outfitted. Because that very first battle group game I came to that he hosted, I was like, holy crap, it had the buildings, the telephone lines, the power lines, the roads, the hills, and the cloth mats. We'll be doing a video on that, on some tips on that I've learned. He knows even more that I'm learning about. But the realism of the board and getting away from the, what would you call it, what were most of us using?
Well, look at Flames of War. Look at your table for Flames of War.
Right.
Super basic, 4 buildings.
It was flat.
Some trees.
With some
flat.
fake hills.
There's a guy in Canada that used to make all the boards for all the tournaments. They're all the same style. They're all the same way. The same look. I've walked through the tournaments several times before.
Yep.
Bolt action is getting a little better, but the same thing with them. They got to really standardize and generalize the tables, because if you do that, you must have the same playing experience between you and I as they play the next competitor in the next 2 hours, and the competitor after that the next 2 hours.
Very generic.
Very generic, because we can't have any variations that might mess up the tournament results. So that's where the scenario game kind of comes into play. When I first saw Battle Group for the first time, it was in 20 millimeter. Well, technically the game's meant for 20 millimeter, true, but it's no different in 15 millimeter as it would be in 28 millimeter. If you look at the ranges, just for a range discussion really quick, is the ranges are actually longer than bolt action. So it's got to be even better in 28 millimeter than bolt action is, which it doesn't make any, it's actually maybe a better game in 28 millimeter for the infantry side of things. So what you look at, when you look at a field, what you're truly looking at is, if you look out here and you step out your front porch here and you look out towards the fields here and you see what does the ground look like? It looks like a blanket in a sense. It's just the overlay of the ground, right? And it ebbs and it flows, and the trees are kind of popping off of that. Some guys like to take pins and punch holes into their blankets and stick up their trees, or some like to put them on bases. I like a little bit more maneuverability. I put them in bases and not worry about so much.
There's like groves of trees.
Groves and trees. You can make it all one base. Same with crops. There's a guy who claims that he designed bear fur and he invented bear fur. Sure, I think he's a fantastic modeler. I see him on Twitter all the time. I think he's got fantastic ideas. He did the Stalingrad board that was really famous for quite some time last year. He's really inspirational in that sense. But once you kind of design something like bear fur, where do you go from there? How do you get the next idea? And that's really where I see, where is this next thing coming from? And that's how these mat companies came about. We're guys who don't want to think about making their own mats. They give me $75, I'll buy whatever I want, and I buy a snow mat because I don't want to do snow. I don't want to do desert. I don't want to do foam board. I don't want to do, I just want to put a mat down and be done with it.
Right.
This is the mat industry. The whole industry is just like this. And that's why these companies have hundreds of mats.
Right. So, and Rob combines like a city or village with the flat mat with the roads, the cobblestone streets, but yet it blends in the cloth mat
Sure.
that you can make yourself from a fabric store. And now we're seeing Cigar Box and these other companies,
those companies
coming out with the cloth mats that look extremely realistic with the tall grass. And again, a golden age of wargaming. I mean, we're seeing the move, and something you just said struck me, and that is a scenario. So you have guys that want to recreate famous historical battles to the T. They want the same units, the same terrain. That's one aspect. But the other aspect that I find is a lot funner is in your own mind sitting back saying, I'm going to come up with scenarios. Say we've got early war French, early war Germans. What could be the point of the game, the objectives of a game, and really kind of coming up with your own scenario that you just make up on your own.
Sure.
Then you sit down and figure out which way will the roads run, and that's where this is a whole other creativity side of the hobby that I'm wanting to get better at, and that is to making my boards or my tables look more immersive, more, wow, you know, look at this cool little village, and then you've got this little shack outside of the village, what may be an objective or a downed aircraft, and it just adds so much more to the game.
Sure, definitely. And this is the thing is what we always is the more it looks like a model railroad set, the better.
Right.
If you look at it and you're like, oh wow, what is it, Area 56 or something, or 50, the model company, the model train company that has like buildings and stuff, something 56 or 51,
yeah, I can't
Area 51 or something.
But the details.
It's so you have got like little guys loading up like cargo wagons for the trains are moving through. It's kind of comes to life. You got the snow village, you got, you know, all these different little villages in a train. I went to a model railroad convention here in Columbus last year, and they have all these trains going everywhere. I mean, it's just like a whole little village idea, and everybody's just captivated by it. Kids are captivated by it. The same idea happens here, where you're kind of creating this diorama that comes to life.
Right.
Like, okay,
that you can play in.
Right. That you're actually in it, and you're sending your troops through this village to clear out this village. Well, it doesn't have to be the Battle of Normandy. There's so many little Normandy towns that you could be any road network could probably work. A Civil War battle. It doesn't have to be Gettysburg. I've seen huge tables of Gettysburg in 15 millimeter with fire and fury rules. Like, it doesn't have to always be Gettysburg. We know how that Gettysburg is going to end. The Confederates are going to lose at some point, right? They might win the hill. They might take Little Round Top. But after a while, they're going to be like, we run out of guys. We're going to have to go home for tonight. You know, it's just the kind of thing that happens. Battle of Antietam. It kind of has an ebb and a flow to it, that if you send all the federal forces in, the 5th Corps who sat out the whole day, if you send them in there, Robert E. Lee is not getting away. He's not going back to West Virginia that night. So it's kind of that thing where you can kind of hypothetically change history, historical history. You can try something different. What if the federal forces didn't go through the cornfield at Antietam? What if they went around it? You know, those kind of things. And that's where you kind of play with the idea of sometimes you don't always know what's on the battlefield. You can't spot everything that you can see. You don't know how big it's going to be. It's operating in a blind. It's a ghost. It could be anything that you don't know. And it's hard to recreate that, because when we look down basically from a god's eye over the tabletop, you see everything, so you know everything. In combat, when you're standing, as the combat survivors would say, they only saw what was in front of them, 10 feet, 20 feet, 100 yards. They didn't know what else was going on. The officers had no idea what was beyond the trees. And so I think that's the next evolution. Some of you have played maybe a game in your past in the 70s. I still have it. I think mine's stamped 1979. Is Stratego. The game Stratego is perfect. It's a double-blind game that is exactly how a war game should go. You don't know which number it is until you run into that number. You're like, oh no, that's a bomb. I should have sent my miners in first before I killed my number 2 or my number 1. So that's where wargaming, I think, will go next.
The sense of the unknown.
The sense of the unknown and the spotting.
And randomness.
And the randomness, yeah.
Which we were seeing with the cards come in.
Yes.
Which Battle Group is good at when you pull the chits.
Right.
So you've got the chits. You can have random chits that give you a mine or an airstrike. So I think I really like that aspect of randomness. I think Bolt Action has that element to it as well. But when you're speaking there and talking about getting into little segments of series of part of a greater battle, and the rule set that comes to my mind that I'm going to be delving into more of this new year and that Rob introduced me to that doesn't get enough credence would be Forager.
Sure.
Because Forager is a skirmish level, Napoleonic era, American War of Independence era-ish, and we're talking about, you set up like a log home, and you've got scenarios you can create, like here's a group of colonists coming up the road to join a battle that's going to take place, and they happen to run into a squad of British soldiers or Prussian soldiers who are going to the farm to maybe pilfer some chickens.
Sure.
You can set up little scenarios like that are part of a before or after a big battle took place. But the aspect of that game that I really liked was each miniature is a character, like you would have in Dungeons & Dragons. He's got different attributes. He has a name. He has maybe a Bowie knife. This guy has a hatchet. So it kind of fleshes out the miniatures. And when I first played that, and I've been wanting to get to that here, I've got my miniatures painted. I have not made the little character cards, and
Sure.
Adrian McWalter told me they are working on that, where it's like a PDF file where you can create your own little character cards. So using that and then adding an element of randomness to it somehow, and bringing all that together on the skirmish level,
Right.
would be like a next step for skirmish games.
Yeah, Forager's like, again, Adrian McWalter's of Warlord fame. He wrote a bunch of the Black Powder books, and he kind of launched Stand 2 Games, which is his side project for himself. Shout out to him. He does fantastic work.
I call them boutique rules.
Yeah, they're fantastic rules. I've collaborated with him and helped him out and play tested with him on the American War of Independence rules, and also over Malvern Hill. If you've seen some of those, a lot of my pictures and a lot of some of the ideas I had for him in those, I gave him suggestions. He took some of them on, took some of them off. Hey, it's great. Just to kind of work with somebody like that. The Forager rules is what I really bumped into him right when he was just releasing those. There was a forage war in Portugal and Spain during this time between the French, the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese. They were kind of fighting the Salamanca area, those kind of areas where all this stuff was happening. What really comes to my mind is the scene in Cold Mountain when Jude Law is in the log cabin, and the federal kind of raiders or the foragers show up, and he basically tells them to go away, and he shoots one of them, I think, or she shoots one of them, where they're out there trying to get the pig and they're trying to get the chickens and kind of get those kind of things. This is what it makes me think of, is this kind of period of time where 3 or 4 guys are showing up, they're running around trying to find food. The same thing happened in the Forage War in 1777 with the Hessians and the British and the Americans trying to find food. They're stealing like 100 heads of cattle and running with them, and the British are chasing them because they're stealing their cattle. It
really fleshes it out.
Yeah, it really brings in that whole idea of the small combats or the small individual fights. In the one game I remember that I actually fought in with Jason, one of our good friends, we were doing a game, and we're in Franklin, Tennessee, of no place, like half a mile from the battlefield in Franklin, Tennessee, and we're doing a forage game in this Airbnb, and he shoots my leg, knocks me down, and he's going to go there and try to like stab me or something. And one of the modifiers is that he has a height advantage because I'm laying on the ground because I can't walk anymore. So he gets a +1 because he's higher than me, because I'm laying and crawling across the ground. So he gets a height advantage. So just kind of this little bit of nuance fun where you're just kind of like surviving like just a couple guys.
Yeah, well, it's like being a D&D player from the 70s.
Yep.
It's like a Dungeons & Dragons character. You're really, I think it adds a whole lot of depth to the future of gaming. I think that's one of the things I want to promote here on the channel is, I was just telling Rob, I don't know, I'm going to give this ACW another big, deep project.
Oh, no.
It's so much nicer to be legions, these little small kits, and I can paint up, like I've already got my Forager stuff painted up. I got Prussians, and all I have to do is build the cards, and I can set up a scene. I want to buy that Sarissa plantation house, and those kinds of things, and kind of do these little nitty gritty games where there's a real deep scenario set up with characters, and you could actually do a series of games where this group of, say, 4 colonial troops, let's say, and they just have these adventures and different encounters, and you could play that out as a war game.
Well, you could do the Patriot, Swamp Fox. You could do that.
Right.
Just like that. That's easy. Charleston, South Carolina, something like that. Virginia. I was just thinking that you could probably paint stormtroopers faster than you can paint this epic Civil War stuff, because it's going to take you more colors for the Confederates than it will for a stormtrooper. I think stormtroopers 3 colors. So
right.
yeah,
it's like when I redid this basement, guys. At one point I got into it and I said, what have I got myself into here? Because that happens sometimes in life. You just get into, you go, hey, this looks great, and you get into it and you're like, wow, this is going to be more than I bargained for.
When you said you ordered them, I'm like, good luck. You can go for it. I'll give you.
So we'll see, but I just wanted to thank you for coming to the gaming hall today, Rob. It was a lot of fun, and look forward to future games. Hopefully do some more sit downs in the future.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming to the studio today, guys. I really appreciate your support. Again, get on over to History to War Games podcast. He's fired that back up here in the last year, putting episodes back up again. And where could they find that? Is that on any of the podcast players?
It's on the podcast apps, yeah. I think the best way is to find us on Twitter. I think it's H2W Podcast. That's my Twitter handle. You can find us on the Facebook groups like usual. Join us on Battle Group Wargame Rules. That's kind of our group where we share a lot of stuff. We posted some Vietnam stuff we've been working on. Had some great pictures with that. We got Hueys, we got VC, we got tunnels, we got all this kind of stuff that we've been working on to kind of give you that kind of glimpse into, I love chopper shots when you're looking down and the chopper's in focus but the terrain below isn't, and kind of giving you that kind of stuff too. So yeah, join us over there, wherever you may want to join us.
I know it's on I forget what the app is called on the Android, but the podcast app. I know it's on mine. So if you have an Android phone, I have Samsung. It's on that one. That comes through the, Google Play. So check it out, and give them a shout. Get over on the Facebook group.
Yep.
Thanks again, guys. Thanks, Rob, for coming over today. Appreciate it.
See you guys.
We'll see you guys next time.
See ya.